Let us pray. We give thanks to God for the rich heritage of this province as found in our people. We pray that native-born Albertans and those who have come from other places may continue to work together to preserve and enlarge the precious heritage called Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they be proceeded with. Bill PR 9, Galt Scholarship Fund Act, Bill PR 14, St. Mary's College Act, Bill PR 15, Board of Trustees of the Edmonton Canadian Native Friendship Centre Building Amendment Act 1986. Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Private Bills has further had the following bills under consideration and recommends that they be proceeded with certain amendments. Bill PR 11, the McMahon Youth Services Foundation Act, Bill PR 12, the St. John's Institute Amendment Act 1986, and Bill PR 13, Certified Management Consultants Act.
Having heard the motion by the honourable member for Drumheller, those in favour please say aye. Aye. Opposed please say no. Motion is carried.
Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 31, the School Amendment Act 1986. The purpose of the amendment is to continue to reflect the rights of the English-speaking majority in Alberta regarding the language of instruction, while recognizing the constitutional rights, where numbers warrant, of French-speaking Albertans, as contained in Section 23 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
The Honourable Minister of Education has moved first reading of Bill 31, School Amendment Act 1986. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion is carried.
A bill being School Amendment Act 1986, introduced by Honourable Mrs. Betkowski, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the 8th annual report of the Alberta Library Board for the period ending March 31st, 1986.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table the 1985 annual report of the Grand Prairie Regional College.
Introduction of special guests.
It's my pleasure today, Mr. Speaker, in your gallery, to introduce Mr. Murray Doran, the Member of Parliament for Edmonton West, his wife, Karen Lynch, and their guests, Mr. and Mrs. Hart, and Ms. Caroline Gregory. I would ask them to stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 22 grade 10 social studies students visiting us today from Concordia College High School. They're seated in the public gallery along with their teacher, Mr. Keith Cruzy. I would ask all members to provide the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure for me to introduce some special guests who are in Edmonton from out of province this afternoon from beautiful British Columbia. Friends of mine from McBride in the Robson Valley, Rick Thompson and his daughter Holly. I'd ask them to rise and be welcomed by the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I too would like to introduce two friends of agriculture, especially the beef industry, to you and through you to the Assembly. I'd ask that Mr. Bob Prestige of Camrose and Mr. Bud Bowe of Acme, who are directors of Western Agribition in Regina, please stand and be accorded the usual welcome from the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct my first question to the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that the PGRT will be removed on October the 1st as long as certain conditions are met, two of which it seems have to do with gas deregulation proceeding on November the 1st, and that the province proceeds with what I've told as complementary initiatives. My question to the Minister, has the province agreed to these two conditions at this point?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question then, Mr. Speaker, following from this and the talks that have been going on, and Mr. Speaker, given that this tax, and we all agree, was clearly an intrusion into provincial jurisdiction, are we at this point even considering these conditions?
Well, Mr. Speaker, with respect to gas deregulation, we signed an agreement with the federal government and two provinces last year, and November 1st being the date of deregulation, and subject to certain events taking place. We've gone through a transitional year. There are concerns that we've talked about in this House, and we are working to remove those concerns.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. It seems that Mr. Mass is fairly clear today, but given that natural gas deregulation will especially hurt the small producers, and they've asked for a year moratorium, is it still the policy of this government that we're going to proceed ahead on gas deregulation on November the 1st, no matter what the impact is on the Alberta economy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've answered that question numerous times in the course of the session of the legislature, and my answer today is no different than it was before. We are working together to see if we can remove some of these obstacles, and we're making progress, and we will evaluate closer to the date as to what our final position will be. We're shooting for November 1st for the date for deregulation. And with respect to the comment about small companies, I believe the honourable member is inaccurate in that the deregulation process is primarily to assist small companies who haven't been able to get access to markets in the past to now be able to do so.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, they're still asking for a year moratorium. It's not them that sees the benefit of it. Maybe the government thinks that they will. But my question flows from the tidy little term complementary initiatives, Mr. Speaker, that the province proceed with complementary initiatives in terms of the PGRT. My question is, would the minister assure us at this time that the complementary measures that Mr. Mass is talking about, that these measures will not further deplete our revenues when we're facing a huge deficit in this province?
Mr. Speaker, we have not committed ourselves to any complementary or additional initiatives.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy, it appears he's come up dry again a second time, but between now and October the 1st, will the Minister come up with a system whereby the $500 or $700 million of PGRT, if it is released, let's not count on it, but if it is he going to come up with a system where it'll be reinvested in Alberta and not just disappear into the treasuries of the large companies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly can understand the disappointment of the Honourable Liberal Leader in that the federal government announced today the removal of the PGRT, given that it was his favourite government in Ottawa that put the program in place in the first place. The news today is welcome news, and I think demonstrates the cooperative relationship that has existed between our government and the federal government over the last 2 years with respect to the Western Accord of last year, natural gas pricing agreement, and we intend to have further discussions with the federal government in an ongoing way particularly with respect to the fact that the energy problems of today are a national problem, and the federal government recognizes that. And we will be having additional discussions that are this week and subsequent weeks discuss other initiatives that might be taken.
Member for Clover Bar, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy, has the Minister's Department done any projections as to what effect the removal of the tax will have on the oil economy in this province?
Well, Mr. Speaker, yes, we have had an evaluation done with respect to the impact of the removal of PGRT on the industry. We've also had feedback from the industry itself as to their perceptions as to the impact of this. I think they recognize it as an initial step to help the industry get back on its feet as a result of the decline in prices. But that given the cash flow losses of at least $5 billion from last year to this year, that whatever the total amounts would be injected into the system by the removal of PGRT, whether it be $600 or $100 million over the course of the time period, whatever the estimate might be, that in itself certainly is not going to put the industry back on its feet. It's a benefit to approximately 50 companies. Since earlier in the year, we made an agreement to remove PGRT essentially for all the smaller producers. And this is the removal of the final vestiges of that tax, and is a good first step towards helping the industry, but much more needs to be done yet.
Second main question, Leader of the Official Opposition. Supplementary, Bev Cochran.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy. Has his officials conducted an assessment of the contribution of the producers in this province, therefore, to the federal government and to all of Canada of the PGRT since its introduction by the Liberal government in 1981?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't have the numbers at my fingertips in terms of the amount of money that have gone to the federal government under the total time period that PGRT has been in place, but certainly there's no doubt that Western Canada and Alberta in particular have made significant contributions to assisting the consumers in this country and with the benefits achieved as a result of oil prices being less than world prices. However, I would add, Mr. Speaker, that given the move today, let us not forget the moves that we've been taking in the last year with respect to the reduction in royalty, the marginal rates for royalties, the royalty tax holidays, and a number of incentive programs that have been brought in during the course of the last year and a half.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my second question to the Provincial Treasurer. Mr. Speaker, to the Provincial Treasurer, is the provincial government aiming at specific percentage figures for reduction of the provincial budget in the years 1987-88?
Mr. Speaker, with respect to 87-88 planning procedures, we have discussed among my colleagues in caucus and cabinet a variety of scenarios which recognize the deficit position of this year and are attempting to provide reasonable direction for next year as well.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer. Is it not the case that the Treasurer's revenue projections for next year look so bad that he is planning for an across-the-board cut of up to $1 billion in next year's budget as compared to this year's?
Mr. Speaker, the member is clearly dealing in the area of speculation, and it's much too soon for us to make any conclusion with respect to the revenue forecast, which he mentions, or for that matter, to deal with the budget predictions on expenditures. Suffice to say, however, that we will use good, prudent management to devise a fiscal plan which will see Alberta through 1987 and 1988, as we have done in 86 and 87.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer. Very interesting answer, because, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to file for the Assembly a memo dated August 26th from the Provincial Treasurer, which asks for plans for cuts of 5 and 10% in the budget of each department, Mr. Speaker. My question then to the Treasurer is, why is the Treasurer asking for such huge cuts which will increase unemployment and hurt people programs instead of attempting to support our energy revenues through a nationally negotiated floor price for our oil.
Mr. Speaker, I hasten to respond to the member's long and consistent arguments about the size of our borrowing program, which this member has held up in this Assembly for some particular period of time. It has been he who has focused on the size of borrowing requirements. It is he who has suggested that that has to be far too high, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's only good, competent management to look at a variety of scenarios for the province of Alberta to show that we are in charge of the situation here in this province, and we have alternatives for the fiscal plan for 87-88. That's what we were elected to do, and that, by goodness, is what we're going to do.
You have to admit the Treasurer, even when he's caught with his pants down, always attempts to yell and scream to try to justify it. But my question to the Honourable Treasurer, in view of the fact that we have this memorandum, specifically what this government is contemplating, and I say to the Treasurer, it's very unimaginative to propose fixed percentage cuts in each department instead of prioritizing and eliminating real waste like trips around the world and cars and all the rest of it. And my question to the Treasurer, saying that a cost of 10% in the person-year allocation would cost Albertans some 3,800 jobs, for example, has the Treasurer, before he put out this memorandum, made a point of asking for a study of the unemployment that such cutting would cause and the effect such employment will have on future provincial revenues?
Well, Mr. Speaker, you've already seen in this House our clear understanding and our high priority on unemployment. The way in which we devise the fiscal plan for 86-87 clearly recognizes that and points specifically to those new initiatives which have been discussed widely, which have been enumerated in a number of cases by my colleagues, the Premier, the Minister of Manpower, and others. Mr. Speaker, it's not a secret that we have written a memo talking about a set of scenarios. If the member had asked the question directly, I would have been pleased to ask about it. He simply talked about it. But, Mr. Speaker, instead of running and screaming and shouting and running about like the opposition does, we are absolutely looking at a variety of scenarios before we come to any conclusion whatsoever. Let it not be said that we do not have a plan, and let those who criticize us for not thinking ahead be the ones who will take the embarrassment in the longer term, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, if I may address the supplemental to the Treasurer who's in the Emperor's clothes today. Could he tell us just why he would go to a draconian measure of 5 to 10% across the board rather than taking those departments that have to have money due to the mismanagement of the government to help out the unemployed?
So, Speaker, let me say that in terms of the timing of this assessment, obviously this is very early in the budget planning. We have not yet gone through the Legislative Assembly for some of the appropriation dollars which have been requested. We're still discussing the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, for example. And so what we have done, Mr. Speaker, in a reasonable approach to the situation is to ask the departments to have a look at what would happen if we had a couple of scenarios, the 3 scenarios which have been suggested, and then we'll see what falls out and we'll assess it when we have some time in our Cabinet and caucus meetings to address that problem. It should not be suggested for a second, Mr. Speaker, that we're giving up on our job creation, that we're ignoring the need to continue with infrastructure investment, that we're continuing with the high level of services this province is well known for, and at the same time maintaining a very low tax regime. That is part of our fiscal plan. It's well accepted by the people of Alberta, but they expect us to look at the other side. Sometimes you have to deal with the difficult information, with the difficult processes before you, and sometimes you have to deal with these cases. We're prepared to do it, the people of Alberta know it, and we're assessing very effectively and proficiently what kind of forecast we have to look for in 87-88, and we're going to do the job.
Supplementary question, member for Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, to the provincial treasurer, in looking at the income side, can the provincial treasurer indicate if there is a figure that the minister or the Minister of Energy are using as to some base that they would project their figures on as to what the price of oil would be, to look at, is there some base price that they're looking at in their projections?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, we have contacted and discussed with a variety of people who are considered to be experts in the area as to what might be the price forecast through 87, 88. It'd be very difficult for me to pick one figure out of the air, although I know the opposition would like to see that. But of course, we will simply look at a variety of information bases. We'll look at the makeup of the revenues from a variety of sides, because it's not just oil revenue, for example, a variety of other revenue sources which are there, except to say that our general assumptions with respect to firming of energy prices has now been reinforced. The oil price, OPEC today, for example, has confirmed that in fact the prices have firmed and that the September 1st arrangement on production limits has been very effective, and in fact the prices are starting to move up. Well, you can argue differently, but of course that is our assumption. The gentleman asked for what we are doing in terms of our forecast, and that's a broad approach to that analysis.
Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, when an individual is granted the honor of being elected to this assembly, they enter into a sacred trust with Albertans that they will not, amongst other things, use their position to benefit monetarily. We all have a responsibility to ensure that that sacred trust is respected and that Albertans, Mr. Speaker, have the confidence in the integrity of the system. It's no way diminished in reality or perception. No one has a greater responsibility for this, of course, Mr. Speaker, than the Premier. So to the Premier, will he instruct the member for Whitecourt to immediately indicate to this Assembly whether he has received or expects to receive provincial assistance under the Small Business Equity Corporation program?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said before in the House, that I had an opportunity to look into this matter, and a member of the Legislative Assembly who operates under the Legislative Assembly Act could participate in a variety of programs that are available to general classes of people in Alberta, and can do so under the Legislative Assembly Act. No different than members who farm, who receive grants in the farm fuel allowance, members who receive grants in the area of cattle, a variety of areas, members who have racehorses. There's a variety of areas in which a member of the Legislative Assembly can quite properly participate in certain programs that the government has.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad he brought up that. But some time ago, I put him the questions. He said he took under advisement. This was a month and a half ago, as to how many ex-cabinet ministers had availed themselves of forming corporations to apply for assistance under the SBEC program. Surely the information can't be that difficult to obtain, or does he consider it unimportant? How many more?
Mr. Speaker, at this stage, the information I've seen, there are none.
Okay, keep going.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier has said he will consider any suggestions from the opposition as to the length of time for a cooling-off period for ex-cabinet ministers before they can benefit from government programs. Why doesn't he consider it an important enough matter to have an idea of his own in this regard?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know quite how the question follows as a supplementary. It doesn't seem to have any relevance at all to the initial question. Nevertheless, if you would like me, Mr. Speaker, to take some time with the House to talk of the matter of members not being able to participate in certain areas of expertise once they leave the legislature, I found that it's quite a perplexing matter. We currently have a conflict of interest rules plus the Legislative Assembly Act. They are very strict guidelines. The Legislative Assembly Act is very strict. You have to balance that with a member of public considering whether they should participate as an elected representative in this province. I think once they make the decision to do so, they tend to suffer a great deal in terms of their family and other things that they have to give up. Time, privacy, ability to build their businesses in the future, matters like that. We have to balance that with the need to make sure that members of the Legislative Assembly aren't taking some unfair advantage. And I think that's what has been done by the Conflict of Interest rules and the Legislative Assembly Act. If we build a fence around the legislature in such a way that we make it so difficult for capable people in our province not to become members of the legislature, then I think we do ourselves and the entire province a tremendous disservice. Also, I think it's particularly unbecoming a member of this legislature who tries to insinuate matters like that, because it doesn't bring credit to themselves nor credit to the legislature. And there are matters of some considerable importance facing the province these days, and for one of the leader of a very respectable party to pursue a line like this in order to try and splash mud, I guess, I think is very regrettable.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. He may consider it mud, but I think the public is very interested in knowing his idea of morals. Mr. Speaker, I'm sick and tired of hearing the Premier say that he's taken something under consideration, that it really doesn't matter, that we're throwing mud if we get after it. Surely to God he can come up with a better set of rules than what he now lives by when it comes to whether cabinet ministers or ex-cabinet ministers can take advantage of government programs.
Honourable member, it's hardly a brief supplementary. The chair would like to hear the brief supplementary question.
When will we see some action?
Mr. Speaker, very simply to the Premier, when will we see some action? Surely he is not condoning people sitting in cabinet and then moving to the front of the line when money has been given out on a first-come, first-served basis.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've answered that question already. And the member may wish to review Hansard, and if he has any additional questions, he can raise them tomorrow.
Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, what is the difficulty in having MLAs and cabinet ministers putting their business dealings in blind trust while they serve in this assembly? I don't understand that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member would review, most members do that very thing, place their holdings in blind trust. As my case and other members of the cabinet, I'm not sure if the honourable members had a chance to review the conflict of interest guidelines under which the cabinet currently handles any business dealings in this province.
Main question for the representative party, the member for Clover Bar, followed by the member for Vermilion Viking.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture, and this has to do with the grain workers' strike at Thunder Bay. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to know if the Minister has anything to report about the strike that's on at Thunder Bay, and if the situation has changed since the question was just asked last week on Thursday.
Mr. Speaker, might I thank the honourable member for Clover Bar for his question and indicate to him that we were in communication this morning with the office of the minister responsible for the Canadian Wheat Board, Mr. Charlie Mayer, and we can leave the honourable member in the chamber with the assurance, as was relayed to us by his office, that the federal minister is going to do everything within their power to make sure that we do meet our grain commitments for offshore sales.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister. Is the Minister in a position to indicate if any of the grain shipments have been diverted to the West Coast? And is the capacity being saturated at this time out on the West Coast?
Mr. Speaker, to my knowledge, no, none of them have been diverted yet. I should share with the honourable member, as I'm sure he is aware too, there are some countries that we can only ship to from Thunder Bay, and I'm sure the minister, when he's analyzing as to what action he is going to take, will analyze as to whether we should redirect some of our grain transportation. But again, I leave the honourable member the assurance that in the communication that we did receive, and I'm quite confident that our federal colleagues will be taking every action to make sure that our grain continues to move.
Supplementary question to the Minister of Manpower. Can the Minister of Manpower indicate if any of the people who are employed in the railroad business have been affected by the strike? Any of the Alberta rail workers have been affected by the strike on Lakehead?
Mr. Speaker, it's not the practice of the Department of Manpower to monitor specific job losses. Basically, we rely on Statistics Canada figures to give us an overall view of where the soft spots are in the job market. Certainly, none have come to my attention.
All right, member for West Lac Sturgeon.
Speaker, to the Minister of Agriculture, is the Minister working with his federal counterparts on some sort of a scheme or some sort of a system to cover the costs to farmers of storing grain that they will not be able to deliver for the next while?
Mr. Speaker, this would come solely under federal jurisdiction. We haven't been approached on that basis whatsoever from our federal counterparts. And again, we're hopeful that some action will be taken, and again, quite confident that Mr. Mayor will take some action over the next number of days to alleviate the difficulties that we are presently facing.
Thank you. Member for Vermilion Viking, followed by the member for Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Social Services, in these times of greater stress, our excellent social programs are very much needed. It would be a great mistake if the level of funding for delivery of such programs was jeopardized by inconsiderate misuse of such programs by a minority of people. Could the Minister indicate what level of abuse is evident in our programs today?
Mr. Speaker, while this is a matter that from time to time is raised with me and other department staff, I would clearly indicate to the House that the vast majority of people who are recipients of our various programs have no problem complying with the regulations involved in the programs. However, it is true that there are a minority of people, for the honourable member's information, that have from time to time received our specific attention. In the last year, there might have been some 2,500 investigations across the province, which I believe would relate well to the same type of occurrence, for instance, in the unemployment insurance program, where I believe that they've had a greater problem in that regard. But there's been a very, very small group of people who have been convicted, actually in a criminal sense, less than 100, I'm sure, that have been convicted for actual fraud.
Thank you. Supplementary to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate the responsibility she would expect from the general public in identification of such misuse?
Well, Mr. Speaker, currently the information on concerns such as this are raised in various places with my office and regional offices around the province, and I would expect that the public would continue to raise such concerns in the very same way by reporting them, and they would be investigated. I think it's important to note that one of the concerns raised with me that relates to the individual members of the public that come forward is that they are not provided with information on such investigations, and it's absolutely inappropriate for either the Minister's office or individual department staff to speak to individual investigations and information related to them.
Supplementary. I believe it's very important to maintain these programs at these times, and I was just wondering if you could indicate, are the departments making a concerted effort to safeguard the management of our public funds?
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker. We have, as I've related before, investigating units across the province, both in the rural regions and in the Calgary regions. The people who do such work, for instance, we have a number of retired RCMP officers, all of whom I'm sure are quite capable of carrying on investigations.
Member for Edmonton Calder.
To the Minister of Supplementary, has the Minister done any investigation into the reasons why more and more people are lined up at the food banks?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure the question is entirely related, except to say that our information, certainly the latest out of the Calgary region, is in fact the food bank is being utilized to a much lesser degree.
Thank you. Member for Edmonton Belmont, followed by the member for Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are about West Edmonton Mall, and I'll direct the first one to the Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, I have asked the Minister on previous occasions about the letter to 555, which warned of a catastrophe with the mine bender. The Minister assured me on August the 14th that he would check into where this memo went and report back to the Assembly. To the Minister, Mr. Speaker, which senior official saw this warning, and in particular, did the letter cross the desk of the Minister of the day?
Whether it crossed the desk of the Minister of the Day, I'm not prepared to respond to, nor do I know. The letter concerned would have gone from the appropriate people in the department to West Edmonton Mall. I have not checked further into whose desks it crossed in the process.
Well, I don't know what happened on August the 14th that would have made that commitment. However, supplementary then, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. On August the 18th, the Premier stated that he would review the Minister of Labour's statement about the government not having the responsibility to continually monitor the operation of amusement rides in Alberta. Can the Premier advise the Assembly what policy guidelines regarding the monitoring of amusement rides came from a review of that meeting with the Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I've discussed the matter with the Minister, and the government feels that its current regulations and actions are appropriate, subject to, of course, the inquiry which is currently being conducted, which I think should be able to provide an excellent basis for any changes that might be required.
Supplementary question. I'll go back to the Minister of Labour, Mr. Speaker. When the Minister toured Fantasyland following the tragedy with the Mindbender, was he advised at any time of any problems with the ride known as the Drop of Doom?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said before in the legislature, I spent quite a number of hours at West Edmonton Mall that Sunday with senior members of the department. At the close of that tour, we had a meeting and indicated to the management people from West Edmonton Mall on site that 3 rides, in addition to the roller coaster, were to be kept closed pending certain provisions being fulfilled. Those rides included a free-fall drop machine, I don't know its popular name, a boat that goes over the top of the loop, and the other small roller coaster that tours around the original part of West Edmonton Mall's Fantasyland. Those 3 rides, it was felt that before allowing them to reopen, we wanted to have sufficient confirmation of maintenance programs and of the recording of maintenance programs before we would allow them to reopen. That request was fulfilled, and as those requests were fulfilled, those rides reopened.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the Minister taken any action following the revelations at the Mindbender inquiry Friday regarding continual unsafe loosening of bolts on the Drop of Doom ride? That is, will the ride be shut down and checked for its safety now?
Mr. Speaker, I have every reason to believe that West Edmonton Mall are fulfilling the requirements that were given to them the day following the accident on the big roller coaster. I've had no indication to the contrary, and I am informed that they have been completing the requisite maintenance and recording it since that time, and there is no indication for closing the ride at this time.
Thank you. Member for Calgary-Buffalo, followed by the member for Edmonton-Millwoods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A question to the Minister of Education. Today is International Literacy Day, which should not go unnoticed in this House, since over 250,000 adults in Alberta, 14% are functionally illiterate. A government report presented to the Department of Education in June of this year states that illiteracy is a low government priority and there is no overall coordination of programs. It also states that our school system may offend the Charter of Rights by discriminating against adults who need education. Would the Minister advise the House whether the government agrees that illiteracy should be a priority and what plans it has to do about it?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the honourable member that illiteracy should be a priority, and I would argue that, in fact, it is a priority of this government. I'm pleased the honourable member gave me an opportunity to speak to a statement this morning by the Honourable Minister of Advanced Education and myself with respect to International Literacy Day today. As members may know, since 1967, the member countries of UNESCO have participated in this day, and this year UNESCO is launching an appeal that the matter be further addressed. I think that in Alberta we have done very good programs with respect to the illiterate. And in Alberta, I would note that 12%, by my information, of Albertans are defined as illiterate. But I would draw to the House's attention the fact that illiterate in those terms is defined by Census Canada and is part of the whole Statistics Canada mandate as those who have received less than a grade 9 education. Illiteracy to some may mean that one may not read or write, so I think it's important to define what the 12% illiteracy is addressing in Alberta. We have recognized in funding of programs for adult illiterates and for those who wish to upgrade their educational skills, both in the education mandate and the advanced education mandate. And as a government, we have committed $1.5 million to adult basic education in the grades 1 to 9 level this year, and another $9.8 million for grades 10 to 12, as well as education for those in correctional institutions. I could go on, Mr. Speaker, but I can see you're anxious to get up.
Is that the original, pardon me, honourable member, the chair recognized that the original question was actually 2 questions, and we seem to have gotten 2 answers as well. Supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the minister undertake to act on the report and push for a secretariat or other structure with permanent employees in order to coordinate an all-out attack on illiteracy in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, a secretariat, as recommended by the honourable member, would not be my first recommendation. I believe that the honourable Minister of Advanced Education and I have reaffirmed our very strong commitment to literacy in this province, and I, for one, am not convinced that creating another entity is the best move at this time in order that government can turn its back on the problem of literacy. I would rather address it, and I think the report which the honourable member is referring to, which is made to my department, is an important one, and it's one recommendation. I could say I'm receiving others which don't necessarily agree with the one the honourable member has recommended, but certainly the context of that report is something I am looking at in the whole review of the School Act for 1987.
Supplementary to the Minister of Manpower, Mr. Speaker, it's estimated that illiteracy costs the U.S. economy $20 billion per year. What has the Department of Manpower discovered about the correlation between illiteracy in Alberta and unemployment, and also the number of accidents caused by the inability of employers to read safety instructions?
Mr. Speaker, I'd have to hear that question again to determine how it relates to the manpower portfolio.
Could I repeat the question, Mr. Speaker? It says, what has the Department of Manpower discovered about the correlation between illiteracy, the number of people who are illiterate, and the amount of unemployment that we have in this province, as well as the number of accidents that would be caused on sites as a result of the inability of employees to read instructions?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say, as far as the second part of the question, I have seen nothing that correlates accidents in the workplace to illiteracy, and I'm sure that there probably is some tie. However, it's beyond the jurisdiction of the Department of Manpower. As far as the answer to the first question, I would also suspect that a certain level of illiteracy contributes to a certain level of unemployment, and so I would accept that preposition, Mr. Speaker. However, I do not have any statistics that would confirm or deny that supposition.
Community and Occupational Health, I'll take the second part of the question under notice. That minister is responsible for workers' compensation, and there might be some correlation there.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Social Services, can the minister tell the House what Social Services has discovered about the correlation between illiteracy on the one hand and poverty and the need for social assistance on the other?
Mr. Speaker, I am aware of reading from various parts of the country and North America that people who are in the lower level of income are generally have a lower education level. I think that's probably well known to all. I'm not sure whether I would have any specific figures, but I would certainly undertake to look for the honourable member.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore.
To the Minister of Manpower, in the area of job training, I'm wondering if the minister takes into account the rate of illiteracy in people that are going into training, and and determining that they will have access to job training or training in literacy so that they are not denied access to some of the job training programs because of that?
Mr. Speaker, this whole question invokes considerable thought in the area of illiteracy and unemployment, and I appreciate the points being brought up by the members opposite. I would say that, that people who are out of work and who are looking for work and do go to the Alberta Career Centres are counseled on job opportunities, and certainly along with that counseling are made aware of the additional education that is available through extended education through various departments of this government, and certainly in terms of new Canadians, the English as a Second Language program at the Alberta Vocational Centre. So I would hope that people who are interested in finding out the relationship between illiteracy and unemployment would consider the Alberta Career Centres to be able to access the information that is available through a variety of programs for upgrading individuals' education.
Member for Edmonton Millwoods. Supplementary, Red Deer North.
To the Minister of Education, could the Minister indicate to us if the initiatives of the secondary curriculum review and initiatives in that area in general will have an impact on future generations in terms of illiteracy?
Mr. Speaker, that's a very important question, and I spoke basically to the adults who are Albertans who are coming through the school system, both secondary and post-secondary. However, on the basic education level, I think it's important to note that the new secondary curriculum policy is an attempt to access to every student in this province a good educational program. I will be shortly announcing within the context of that a diagnostic evaluation program which will look at elementary schools and children who may have needs of remedial reading skills at that level. I think it's important as well to say that my goal as Minister of Education in part will be to ensure that the students passing through our elementary and secondary program do not wind up as illiterate adults.
To a member for Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, as we've already been told, today, of course, is International Literacy Day, and I would direct a question to the Minister of Advanced Education, who's responsible for adult literacy in the province of Alberta. It seems to me, with that 12% of adult Albertans, 1 out of 8, having a level 8 or less education, being functionally illiterate, we would like to know, does the government have any kind of a comprehensive strategy to deal with the problem of combating illiteracy? And if so, does that include a long-term funding commitment for literacy programs? And will they be shielded by the acts of the provincial treasurer?
Mr. Speaker, there is a substantial commitment to dealing with this problem. And as my colleague mentioned earlier, the definition of illiteracy is anybody having less than a grade 9 education. The article in the Globe and Mail over the weekend in which the honourable member from Calgary-Buffalo formed his questions deal with the matter of job deprivation because of being unable to read or write. And there's quite a difference between those two standards. But currently this year, for example, in the province of Alberta, there are some 23 special projects in communities around Alberta, all the way from Lakeland College in Bonnyville to Slave Lake Further Education Services, whereby attempts are being made to upgrade those basic reading and writing skills, primarily at people involved in the adult level of the workforce. One of the more interesting projects that is handled through the department is the training and organization of non-paid, non-professional tutors, whereby people who have some skills in teaching reading and writing are trained as volunteer tutors, and on a one-on-one basis with students are providing basic reading and writing skills. So as a government member that supports the United Nations and UNESCO objectives with respect to the worldwide problem of illiteracy, we certainly do support and put, as my colleagues mentioned, substantial financial resources into the upgrading of the skills of those people that have been mentioned.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I don't recall a commitment there to save these programs from the Treasurer, but I hope that will be the Minister's intention. But since, for example, the position of the Provincial Coordinator for Adult Literacy is now vacant and has been vacant for several months, and since this position is critical for the effective design and implementation of programs across the province to fight illiteracy, can the Minister advise the Assembly when this important position will be filled?
Time for a question period has expired. Does the Assembly agree to the continuation of this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not certain that there has been agreement reached that there should be a coordinator. Certainly there has been agreement reached that there's got to be a close liaison among the three departments that are involved in this problem, but whether or not we want to go into a formal structure or not has already been commented upon by my colleague, the Minister of Education. Insofar as where does this matter stand with respect to the budget upcoming next year, you've already heard from my colleague, the Provincial Treasurer, that the departments have been asked to examine the effects of a 5% or a 10% cut in their department budgets. And at that time, we will then have a good catalogue of the ramifications of such cuts and be able to make the decisions as to whether some departments ought to be cut, ought to be increased, or ought to be left at their present levels. And surely no one would want us to make those important decisions without at least going through that basic necessary cataloguing.
Supplementary question to the Minister for Economic Development then. Has the Minister done any studies in his department to determine the negative impact that illiteracy in this province has on the economic development of our province?
Mr. Speaker, the Department of Economic Development works very closely with the Department of Manpower, because the Manpower Department provides extensive training programs at various institutions throughout the province, and our departments liaise closely in order that the programs that are offered either through the Minister of Advanced Education's various institutions and the Department of Manpower match as closely as possible the job opportunities that exist or are likely to exist in this province. As all honourable members know, there's a rapid change in the types of opportunities that are available, and we're constantly aware of those changes and work closely together to counsel individuals on where that direction and what opportunities those individuals should pursue with respect to retraining and training for jobs that are likely to be available.
Final supplementary, Calgary-Buffalo.
The Minister of Advanced Education. Does the Minister of Advanced Education agree that with the Minister of Education that this matter of literacy is a priority in light of his reluctance to appoint a full-time coordinator to deal with the issue?
Yes, certainly it is, Mr. Speaker. It's got to be a priority, and society has identified the people that are reluctant to come forward and make known the fact that they're unable to read or write. And as we go into the technological age, these weaknesses, of course, are being discovered. And it's interesting the way people are coming to our vocational centers. The adult population is coming to our vocational centers for training in reading and writing. It's very difficult to track them because, of course, they come when it suits their schedule or their lifestyle, and as they move in and out of jobs in the workforce, it's very difficult to keep them in those classes. But many of you have attended those classes and can see the rewards that come to people who read and write for the first time in their lives with understanding, perhaps at the age of 40 or 45 years. So it remains a high priority with us.
Orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I move that you now leave.